Now it's on. Yeah. You can keep talking for another minute or two. You heard the story about my shoes. I can tell you that my mother would have cracked up. Our mother would have cracked up at this. So I packed quickly to come up here a couple days ago, and I have a pair of comfortable, nice brown shoes that I packed to wear today. And yesterday, I wanted to try on those shoes, and I put on the first shoe, and it felt like super tight. And I thought, I thought these shoes were a little bigger. And then I went to put on the second shoe and discovered it, like the first shoe, was also for the right foot. So I had brought shoes from two different pairs, yeah, they were both brown. I know this story doesn't sound that funny, but yes, I have two left feet. That made it funnier. Thank you all for being here. I'm Rick. I think I've met most of you in the room. And together with Mark and Jay and our families, we're really grateful to all of you for coming out on a night that our dad, Al, would have described as an ugly night. But I think it's actually quite beautiful that we're here together to remember and honor and celebrate an amazing woman. And when I say that we're here together, I also want to acknowledge that some family members, probably in California, maybe in Florida, and elsewhere in Asheville, North Carolina, and friends are also joining us through the live stream. And though you're not here physically present with us, we really appreciate your joining us this evening to remember Shirley Chess, our mom, our Nana. She was Nana to 7 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. Our Auntie Shirley, her grown nieces still call her Auntie Shirley, to Shirley, to our dear friend. And we miss Mom, and we're grateful that we're here together to celebrate. So tonight we're going to hear some memories. We'll have a few rituals. I don't know, did you all get those little white booklets? If you didn't get the white booklets, we need to distribute them. They were out in the lobby. Hang tight, we're going to get those white booklets, but before we get them, we're going to start with a reading of an interpretive translation of the 23rd Psalm. And I think most of you in the room know the 23rd Psalm. And I'll invite you, once we've handed out these booklets, to turn to page 3 in the booklets, where you can find the traditional translation. But I'm going to read an interpretive translation, not of my own. This is done by a writer and a teacher named Norman Fisher. And in this translation, he makes one significant change, and that is, instead of using the word God, he uses the second person pronoun you, because he kind of recognized that God doesn't work for everybody, and yet there's stuff in the 23rd Psalm that many people might find of comfort. And I would like to invite you, if you feel so inclined, as you hear me read this interpretive translation, to think possibly about that you as Shirley, as Mom, as Nana, as Auntie, and see if some of the qualities that are invoked about the divine might also apply to our beloved Shirley Chess. Not that I'm trying to turn her into a god, just, to be clear about that. You are my shepherd. I am content. You lead me to rest in the sweet grasses, to lie down by the quiet waters, and I am refreshed. You lead me down the right path, the path that unwinds in the pattern of your name. And even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear, for you are with me, comforting me with your rod and staff, showing me each step. You prepare a table for me in the midst of my adversity and moisten my head with oil. Surely my cup is overflowing, and goodness and kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and in the long days beyond, I will always live in your house. And so I invite you, those of us, who knew and loved Shirley, to just think some days about living in the house that Shirley built, living in the house of love and wisdom and courage and strength and a great sense of humor. The next short reading is called Woman of Valor. In Hebrew, it's Eshet Chayil, and you can find it on page 7. And I'm going to invite us to read that one aloud together. And before I read it, I want to explain to you why I've chosen this for this evening's memorial service and tribute to Shirley, our mom. Shirley had a work of art, a drawing, hanging over her dining room table for many years with these words on them. And that drawing now hangs in our house, Lori's and mine, in Asheville, North Carolina. So, Woman of Valor. And these words, traditionally, in traditional Jewish practice, a husband would chant these words in Hebrew to his wife on Friday night at the beginning of the Sabbath. Woman of Valor. And I invite us to read this aloud together. So if you feel comfortable doing so, please join me on page 7. A good wife who can find, her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and nothing shall he lack. She renders him good, not evil, all the days of her life. She opens her hand to the needy and extends her hand to the poor. She is robed in strength and dignity and cheerfully faces whatever may come. She opens her mouth with wisdom. Her tongue is guided with kindness. She tends to the affairs of her household and eats not the bread of idleness. Her children come forward and bless her, her husband too, and he praises her. Many women have done superbly, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty vain, but a God-revering woman is much to be praised. Place before her the fruit of her hands. Wherever people gather, her deeds speak her praise. The fruit of her hands, that's us. That's all of us in this room right now. And we are gathered, and her deeds in our memory are speaking her praise. So I'd like to invite Jay to come up now to share some words.
So the bad news is I've got 37 pages here. The good news is I used an extremely large font. That's okay. Okay. You want to roll? Yes. Okay. When I think about how wonderful my mother was when I was growing up, 2 words spring to mind: cigarettes and beer. That's right, cigarettes and beer. I mean, what 15-year-old kid wouldn't adore a mother who gives them cigarettes and beer, right? Maybe that's not completely accurate. So she was working at the time, and she would give us money to buy dinner. We just chose to buy cigarettes and beer. So, of course, my mother would not knowingly give us cigarettes and beer. She was not just another pretty face. She was also very wise, extremely intelligent, very attentive, loving, and nurturing mother. And this, of course, extended to her duties as grandmother and great-grandmother. And she was not only there for all the big events in my life and the lives of my brothers, she was also there for the events of her grandchildren, and whatever it was, be it a sporting event, music event, school event, whatever anybody was into, she was always there. She was just an incredibly loving and caring person, and she was probably as close as anyone could ever come to being a perfect human being. I mean, I never once, not once in my life, heard this woman utter a curse word. Not once. At least not until she took up the game of golf. And I think anybody here who has played the game will understand that it can be frustrating, and it could turn Mother Teresa into a potty-mouthed sailor. But she only cursed a little bit. Now, some of you may find it hard to believe that when I was very young, I was rather shy and introverted, and my parents would try to introduce me to people, and I would just tell people to go away, and I would hide under the table at the restaurant. I wasn't the fun-loving, outgoing guy you see standing before you now. But my mother was always very outgoing and very personable. And she was into a lot of different activities, had a large, diverse group of friends. And she would take us to the swim club every weekend, and she would swim, and she'd play mahjong and play cards, and she'd try to get us involved in different activities. And she would take us on these fantastic trips out to California to hang out with our wonderful and fun relatives out there. And I think over time, I became a more outgoing person just by seeing how she interacted with people and how she dealt with friends and family, and that was certainly to my benefit. But as time went on, I also became more willful, and I wanted to do things my own way. And I know I caused her a great deal of agita. As I got older, it became more and more difficult to make me do things that I didn't want to do. And one of those things was going to Hebrew school. Now, my mother was very, very much involved in Temple Emmanuel. She sat on many committees. She had positions of leadership. It was a big deal for her. So it was important. A religious education was important to her. But again, I absolutely hated Hebrew school. I've never been big on organized religion, and I certainly I didn't want to learn a new language, and certainly not one that doesn't even use the characters in my existing language. So I would cut class, and I would act out, and I wouldn't do the work, and so the phone calls would come continually from the religious school. Jay did this, Jay didn't do that. Jay's in the principal's office again, Jay's not in class, and so forth. So she would admonish me and try to punish me as best she could, but I was difficult and nothing worked to the point where she was begging me, absolutely begging me, to just toe the line for a while and complete the studies for my bar mitzvah. It was very, very important to her. And so, with King Solomon-like wisdom, one day she came to me to strike a deal. And she said this. She said, if you'll just complete the requirements for your bar mitzvah, I will never, ever make you go to synagogue again. I said, let me get this straight. If I get through this stuff now, I don't ever have to go to temple again. I never have to set foot in temple again. She said, that's right. I said, lady, you've got yourself a deal. So I did what I promised, and I completed the training and did everything I was asked to do, and then I was bar mitzvahed. And she held up her end of the bargain, and she never made me go to temple again. And I, being a man of integrity and virtue, as I was taught by my parents, also held up my end of the bargain. And that was with very few exceptions, the occasional wedding or funeral, but I didn't go to synagogue or didn't set foot in the temple. But I made one of those rare exceptions on my mother's 70th birthday. So when she was young, she didn't have the opportunity to get bat mitzvahed, and it was something she had always wanted to do. So at the tender young age of 70 years old, my mother started studying Hebrew and taking classes and doing all of the things that young girls would do to be bat mitzvahed. So I will never forget this. And I went to her bat mitzvah, and as much as I hated the pomp and circumstance of all that, I remember very vividly being extremely proud of my mother that day, that she did this so late in life. And it's a lot of work. But she wanted to do it. She had a goal. She set her mind to it, and she went and did it. And that always impressed me. And it showed me that no matter what age you are, if you want to try something, you want to do something, go give it a shot. What's the worst that happens? You fail. So what? At least you tried. And I'm still very, very proud of her, and I'm still learning things about my mother and her accomplishments, and I continue to be impressed and amazed by how smart she was, how determined she was, and just all the things she was able to get done in her life. Excuse me. Now, one of the things I discovered recently was that my mother took the time to write a letter to her children and her grandchildren that was to be read after she was gone. And she started over 25 years ago, and she updated a number of times over the years, and in it she addressed each of her children and grandchildren directly with her thoughts and feelings about them. And in my section, among many wonderful, kind things she said, she also said this, and I quote, "I hope you have forgiven me for not knowing how to handle you." And then in parentheses, "You sure knew how to handle me." So when I read this, I chuckled. I was amused because I know it was never about handling me or handling any of her children. That wasn't the job. It was about letting us figure things out for ourselves, letting us learn our own lessons, oftentimes the hard way, and letting us each grow and blossom into the individuals we were meant to become. And so there are no apologies necessary here. My brothers and I have all turned out to be reasonably successful, picked wonderful mates, done a fairly good job at parenting, and are all generally pretty decent human beings. So all that really needs to be said here is thanks, Mom. Thanks for everything you did for us. You did your job to absolute perfection. And for that, we love you and will always be eternally grateful. Thanks for coming out, everybody.
Thank you, Jay. That was wonderful, and I love hearing some of those stories, especially the cigarette and beer part. Things I missed out on by being a little bit older, 10 years older than Jay and 7 years older than Mark, and not being around the house to take the money that she was giving us for dinner to go out for coffee, for cigarettes and beer. The last time I heard Mom laugh was shortly after she learned she had stage 4 lung cancer. She had been crying over and over again, asking, "What am I going to do? What am I going to do?" Trying to comfort and calm her down, I reminded her of the many times since Dad died that she had told me no one should live this long. She cracked up. "Yes," she said, But then it was just theoretical. Now I'm really going to die. And she went back to crying. Mom had a great sense of humor. Often, when I'd share with her something that was challenging, say having to do with my mother-in-law, Mom would crack up just like she did that day a few months ago. Her laughter almost always made difficult things seem a little easier. I'm sure her sense of humor was one of the characteristics that everyone loved about her. She seemed to always know how to make you feel better. She was not only good at making each of us feel better, she also contributed to making the world a better place. I guess that was one of the motivations for her chairing Temple Emmanuel's Holocaust Torah Restoration Project. The Torah teaches us that every Jew is called upon to write for herself a Torah scroll. In practice, since not every Jew is a trained scribe, we are taught to sponsor a scribe to write at least one letter in a Torah that then becomes our letter. Mom and Dad sponsored the words Lech Lecha, which mean go forth. These are the first significant words in Genesis 12, in which God says to Abram, he wasn't yet called Abraham, go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. When I was in Ulpan, Hebrew language immersion school, it kind of stuck with me, the Hebrew studies, whatever. But when I was in Ulpan, Hebrew language immersion school, at the beginning of my years-long stay in Israel, Lech Lecha were the first words in Torah that I understood in Hebrew without needing a translation. It was a moment when I knew that a world had just opened up for me. Learning that Mom's words in the Torah are Lech Lecha, learning that Mom's words in the Torah are Lech Lecha, I felt our connection, Mom's and mine, was still very much alive, even after she was no longer physically with us. A little later, I learned that Lech Lecha also means go to yourself, find yourself, discover yourself, the deepest, truest version of yourself. That's what Mom wanted for all of us. She did whatever was in her power to enable each of us to become ourselves. Sometimes that meant getting out of our way. When in April of 1976 I told Mom that I was going to Israel, she seemed pleased, not excited, not relieved, simply pleased. I was about to graduate from what was then called Glassboro State College with my bachelor's degree. I had hoped to go straight from my undergraduate work to an MFA program in creative writing. About a month before I was to graduate, I was rejected by the 4 programs to which I had applied. A year on a volunteer program in Israel seemed, for a variety of reasons, like a good idea. Long after what turned out to be my more than 3 years in Israel, Mom told me that she restrained herself when I shared my plan with her. Mom cared deeply about her Jewish life, but she left it up to each of us to decide whether or not to engage with Jewish life following our becoming B'nai Mitzvah. I dropped out of religious school the day after I became a bar mitzvah. If she had shown me how excited she was, she said, she feared that I would change my mind, just so as not to give her the pleasure. Mom was wise. She knew when to restrain herself, when to withhold her feelings, in order to leave others the space they needed to create their own lives. It is incumbent upon all of us, Mom wrote in her Devar Torah, delivered on the occasion of her becoming a bat mitzvah, to be kind, loving, and giving of ourselves. As you heard from Jay, Mom became a bat mitzvah on her 70th birthday. She continues in her Devar Torah, which is the speech one gives after chanting from the Torah. She writes, "We must carefully guard our relationships with family, friends, and coworkers. Mom did everything in her power to guard and protect us, her beloved husband, Al, her children and our spouses, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, and her entire family. Among the many trips she took to be with family in Los Angeles were the lengthy visits to be with her beloved niece, Connie, when Connie was battling cancer. She told me she would buy a bunch of new pairs of underwear for Dad before she'd head west, knowing that once Dad ran out of clean underwear, she'd have to come home. Mom responded to the challenges she faced, which included challenges in each of our lives, with strength, courage, and wisdom. I was born with a heart problem. Because of that, in the first weeks and months of my life, I needed medical care. Her first husband, my biological father, was a Christian Scientist. Like some Christian scientists, he didn't believe in medical care. So, not long after I was born, Mom divorced him. Many years later, I learned from Mom that I wasn't the cause of the divorce. From the beginning of their short marriage, he didn't want Mom to spend time with her family, her sister and brother-in-law, her nieces, and the rest. Mom stood up for herself and her family, including me, at a time, the early 1950s, when women were expected to be good wives, good homemakers. I don't remember if Mom ever called herself a feminist, but a decade before the beginning of second-wave feminism, Mom was a courageous feminist. 4 years after she divorced my biological father, Mom gave me another of the greatest gifts I ever received. She married Al, my dad, my real dad. Among many other things, Dad made the coffee at meetings that Mom was leading. Mom admittedly made terrible coffee. As Mom drew on her strength, intelligence, talents, and interpersonal skills to create a rewarding life for herself outside the family and home. At every stage of her life, she cultivated deep, meaningful relationships with friends, congregants, co-workers, and those for whom she worked, as well as with Tom, her lifelong hairdresser, who I finally have had the pleasure of meeting, and I'm so grateful to you for taking such good care of her and for being here tonight, as well as all those who helped her in one way or another. Mom worked throughout her life. Among the many positions she held, she served for a number of years as director of support groups for the Medical College of Pennsylvania, the second medical college in the world, established in 1850 to train women doctors. Here's what the president of the Medical College's National Board wrote to the college's president in 1985 about Mom. Shirley Chess, director of support groups, has been a dynamo, sparing neither time nor painstaking care to provide attention to details and personalities in dealing with the National Board. I believe Shirley's diligence and thoroughness deserves the gratitude which we and other board officers feel for her assistance. I feel that you, Mr. President, can be assured that the National Board will continue to offer unique support to the college now that we have a person of this caliber as our liaison. Mom also brought her talents and passion to another of her great loves, Temple Emmanuel, one of Cherry Hill's Reform congregations. When Mom accepted the invitation of a neighbor and friend to join the Temple Sisterhood, she said, "I'll come and help you, but I won't get involved." A minute later, she was vice president of membership for Sisterhood. And from there, she went on to hold many other leadership positions at the Temple, including chairing the Temple's Ritual Committee for 27 years. Ultimately, she served as the president of the Temple's Board of Trustees, a position she held for 3 years. Notably, she was the first woman ever to serve as Temple Emmanuel's president. In fact, the first woman to serve as president of any of the congregations in Cherry Hill. And I learned just yesterday from Rabbi David, she might have been the first woman in America to serve as the president of a congregation. She certainly was among the first. Her service to the Temple in important, impactful ways continued long after she was no longer president. Among many other honors she received in recognition of her contributions to Temple Emmanuel, she was the first recipient of the Temple's Lifetime Achievement Award in 2002 and the Keeper of the Light Award in 2004. The thing that's most important to me, Mom wrote in Mom and Dad's Final Wishes, a note she hung on the side of her refrigerator where we would easily find it, is not to burden any of you. Mom never wanted to be a burden to any of us, even up to her final, very challenging months. The sentence continues, not to burden any of you with cemetery arrangements or feeling any need to visit us there. We won't be there, she said. So please just think of us once in a while, wherever you are. Then, continuing with her classic sense of humor, she concludes, so first make sure we're actually gone, and then have us cremated. I'm not 100% sure, but I feel fairly confident that we honored your wishes, Mom. You may not be here, Mom, but your love and guidance is still very much with me, as it is, I'm sure, with all of us. Remember how over the last 4 or 5 years when we were FaceTiming, and to keep things entertaining, I would tease Lori? That's my wife, Lori. Even though Lori didn't always appreciate it, I kept at it because I thought you, Mom, found it entertaining. In reality, you always spoke up in defense of Lori. Now, whenever I'm tempted to tease or annoy her, I think Mom wouldn't want me to do this, so I don't act on the temptation. Well, I have to confess, I stopped acting on the temptation for the first few weeks after she passed, but now it's a little hard to resist. So it's one small way you continue to guide me, to guard me, to support and protect those you love, very much including Lori. As I told you and Dad many times, you made my life possible, physically, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. The example of your life and your blessings will stay with me everywhere I go, every minute of my life. So I'd now like to call on Gabe Chess, who's going to read some words that Mom's beloved friend and nephew-in-law, Jack Kaufman, sent to share with us at today's service.
I'm here as a surrogate for someone else, for Jack and me. I first met Shirley in the 1960s when I began dating her niece Rona, who was my wife-to-be. Technically, Shirley was my aunt via marriage. In reality, as the years passed, we became dear friends. When I first met her, I couldn't help but see her beauty, as everyone did. But more importantly, her intelligence was obvious, as was her love of family and friends. I soon learned that she was a confidant to so many people, always there when you needed her advice, strength, and encouragement. Her passion for Judaism was lifelong. To hear her laugh, especially at my jokes, was infectious. When she was visiting Los Angeles, everyone wanted to spend as much time with her as possible. Her personality flowed through Rick, Mark, and Jay. It was always a great time. I always wanted to share the moment whenever it was and to feel her strength. Because I am in Los Angeles, my conversations with Shirley were by telephone. They were always about the family, what everyone was doing, and about anything special happening soon. She would reminisce to some degree, but would not dwell on the past. Everything was here and now. She was clearly in the moment. Shirley, you have been loved and will always be loved. Rick, Mark, Jay, and their families are the true beneficiaries of your pearls of wisdom, values, and support. Love, Jack, and Rona, too.
So I'm also going to share a few stories that Rabbi David shared with me yesterday. Rabbi David was Mom's rabbi for decades, and he gave me his blessing to officiate at the service since he couldn't be here this evening. So Rabbi David, of course, characterize Mom right off the bat as very stylish. And as the president of the temple, she had the opportunity to sit on the bima, the platform, during the Jewish high holiday services. And everyone remembers her for the hats she would wear and the way she dressed every year for the high holiday services, including her famous red hat. In fact, this is not a Rabbi David story, but I'll share a little anecdote about her and people remembering those hats. This past May, we were at Gabe's graduation from Michigan Law School, and I was standing in line waiting to get in, and there were a couple of folks chatting just in front of me, also waiting in line to get in. And I kind of picked up a little bit from what they were saying, that they had to be Jewish. Turns out I was right. So I introduced myself to them and started chatting with them a little bit, and found out they were from Cherry Hill. And after confirming that they were Jewish, I also learned they went to Temple Emmanuel. And so I said, well, I went there too as a kid. What's your name? My name is Rick Chess. Rick Chess. Is Shirley Chess your mother? The lady who always wore the hats at Rosh Hashanah services? So Mom's reputation goes far and wide. Jerry told us that in those first years, she always had to give a speech on the high holidays, the president's speech. And one of the first years she served as president, she had Bell's palsy, so part of her face was paralyzed. And he tried to make it really clear to her she didn't need to deliver her speech in front of hundreds and hundreds of people who show up for the high holidays. But she insisted on doing it, and he says she tilted her hat a little bit to one side to try to cover up the paralysis on that side of her face. And he said she did a fabulous job giving the president's speech that year. He also said that Mom could be really tough. And so one year when she was president, there were two rabbis at the time, Rabbi Ed Soslow and Rabbi Jerry David, and they both decided to go to a major important rabbinical conference out of town at the same time. So they went. It was like a 4-day conference somewhere in the Midwest. When they came back and arrived at the temple, who was standing outside the temple doors but our mom, Shirley Chess? She was there to scold them. And she said, you are never both to leave town again at the same time. And after that, they never did. One other thing, there were many things, that he shared with us. And the one other thing that he shared with us is that she didn't like innovations in the service, in the ritual. And so she would allow an occasional innovation to take place, but she really preferred the tradition as it was practiced at Temple Emmanuel. Because, as Rabbi David said, she always said, people want to feel at home when they come here, and they don't want anything to change. So those are 3 stories that Rabbi David shared with us, with Lori and me yesterday when we met with him. Let's turn now to 2 little prayers, and then we'll have one other little piece of the service to conclude with that I hope you'll find meaningful and moving. And so a traditional prayer that is said at this time is called El Male Rachamim, and you can find it along with a translation on page 16 and 17. And I'll chant it first in Hebrew, and then I'll read the translation. El Male Rachamim Shochen Bamromim Hamsei Menucha Nuchuna Tachat Kanfei Shechina B'ma'alot Kedoshim Uteorim Kezohar Harakia Mizhirim Et Nishmat Shulamit Bat Yaakov V'Sara Shehalach Le'olamo Began Eden tehe menuchato, ena be'al harachamim hastirehu, beseter knafecha laolamim, utzror bitzror hachayim et nishmato, Adonai hu nachalato, vayanuach b'shalom al mishkavo, Vinomar, Amen. O God, exalted and full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Shulamit, that's her Hebrew name, Bat, the daughter of Yaakov Visara, Eddie and Sarah Scharf, who has gone to her eternal home. Master of mercy, we beseech you, remember all the worthy and righteous deeds that she performed in the land of the living. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. The Lord is her portion. May she rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. And next is the Mourner's Kaddish. It's in transliteration on page 18. There's a translation of it on page 19, and the Hebrew is on page 20. And those who feel so inclined are invited to stand for the Mourner's Kaddish. Again, I'll chant it in Hebrew, and those who know it are invited to chant along with me. And then I'll read the English translation. Mourner's Kaddish. Yit Gadal v'yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah, B'alma divra chirute, v'amlich malchute, b'chayechon uv'yomechon, uv'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kariv, v'imru Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevarach, le'olam olamei almaya, Yit barach v'yish tabach v'yit pa'ar v'yit romam v'yit naseh, V'yit adar, v'yit alev, v'yit halal, shemeda kudashah, b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata, v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, da'amiran be'alma, v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru Amen. And in English, magnified and sanctified be God's name, be God's great name in this world that God has created according to her will. May her kingdom be established in our lifetime, in our days, and in the lifetime of the whole household of Israel, speedily and soon, and let us say, Amen. May her great name be praised forever and unto all time. Praised, extolled, honored, and exalted, revered and hallowed by God's holy name, praised be she, though she transcends all our blessings, hymns, praises, and exaltations that we may ever offer in this world. And let us say, Amen. May abundant peace descend from heaven upon us and upon all Israel. And let us say, Amen. May God, who established peace in her heavens above, bring peace to us and to all Israel. And let us say, Amen. So we're going to conclude with a little ritual that some Jewish people do to mark the end of the Sabbath. Today, the Jewish people celebrate Shabbat, the Sabbath, from Friday night to Saturday evening. It ends when 3 stars are visible in the night sky, but you can continue it later if you'd like. I'm going to step down there to kind of facilitate this service, but let me say a word or two before I come down and facilitate it. And Rachel, would you mind just coming to the candle and just lifting it up so people can see that candle for a second? And Dylan, you're going to hold the wine. I'll be down there with you in just a second. So You can hold it up so folks can see it. If you can see that, that's a braided candle with like 4 or 5 wicks. Excellent, excellent job. And so when we begin the Sabbath, we start with 2 candles side by side. And over the course, this is in Jewish tradition, of that 26-hour period of the Sabbath of Shabbat, the goal is to try to braid together all the things that stand as oppositions in our lives: male and female, friend and enemy, light and dark, to create wholeness and peace. And then at the very end of the Sabbath, we light this candle that burns so brightly as a way of both celebrating this day when hopefully we experience some wholeness and some unity and some comfort and peace, and also as a way to say goodbye to that moment. But as we look into the candle light, we're hoping to carry some of that light forward with us into the week that comes. And I'd like to invite us today, when we see that candle burning brightly in just a moment, to think about our mother, our Nana, our friend, our colleague, and think about the light that she brought to all of us. And see if in dark moments during the weeks and days and weeks ahead, we might remember Shirley, Nana, Mom, and see that light inside us and know that she's with us and that she will not ever leave us. And I'm sorry about crying now. I tried to get that out of the way before I got here. So now we're going to do this little ceremony. So I'm coming down. Can you, yeah, this microphone's working? Yeah, good. Okay, so there are 2 other elements to this ritual. Just as we light the candle so we can carry the light forward, we also have some sweet smelling spices, and there'll be a little blessing that I'll chant, and then we smell the spices so we can smell all sweet things as we go forward into the week ahead and remember Shirley, our mom's, our Nana's sweetness. And then we also have a little bit of wine, because wine makes everything a little sweeter and better. And our mom was especially fond of cupcake Pinot Grigio. This may be what killed her in the end, because I will just tell you the truth, she was probably drinking about a bottle of this every night. Maybe half a bottle. More like a bottle, okay. As much as we tried to convince her, Mom, this is not going to help you sleep better. And as the aides confirmed, like she would take a sip of wine, fall asleep for 30 minutes, wake up, have another glass of wine, fall asleep for 30 minutes. Anyway, so in honor of her, we're going to use this Pinot Grigio wine as the 3rd component. So let's light the candle. Ay ay ya na 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 ay 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 ya na 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 ay 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 ya na 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 ay ay na 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. And you can lift up that cup of wine now. Borei peri hagafen, borei peri hagafen. Yanana, you can lower it now. And next comes the spices. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei bisamim borei minei bisamim, and you can smell those spices. And finally the candle. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei mi orei ha'esh borei mi orei ha'esh. And it's traditional, if you want, to see if you can see the light of the candle reflected in your fingernails. And in fact, according to Jewish teaching, the soul leaves the body through the fingernails. But if you can see light reflected in your fingernails throughout the week, it's a way to recall the light of the Sabbath. And in this case, in this context, the light of our dear, beloved mother, Nana, and friend. And finally, we will douse that candle in that cup. And I'm willing to do that. I am willing to do that. There's one other little tradition that I've learned from one of my friends and teachers, and that is to dip your finger in the wine, put a little bit behind between your ears, and a little bit on your eyelids, so you'll see all sweet things during the week, and so you'll hear all sweet things during the week. And Mom, this is an honor of you. And now we say Shavua Tov. May it be a good and sweet week for all of us. And I want to give a special thank you to Jay and Judy and Mark and Jane and to Lori. You all have taken such good care of her, especially in this last difficult period of time. And to all the grandkids who have taken such good care of her. I don't know if any of you saw the photo, but there's a photo of Alice holding my mom's hand the day before she died. Alice came down from New York and spent 9 hours with her that day. So thank you all for being here. You're invited to join us all at Dooney's.
Route 73 in Voorhees.
Route 73 in Voorhees. I know some of you are not able to join us, but you're welcome. There'll be plenty of food.
Oh, yes. Liquor.
Liquor.
Plenty of Pinot Grigio. Pinot Grigio.
Cigarettes.
Cigarettes.
Cigarettes, I hope. Counting on that.
Weed.
Weed.
New Jersey.
New Jersey, exactly. Really, thank you. It's such a great honor. And there are directions to Dooney's that you can pick up on your way out the door. Thank you for being my mother's friends. Have a good night and a wonderful New Year. Thanks.
Nice job, guys.